idea. Selling is a basic part of entrepreneuring. You have to sell resource providers whenever you want something from someone else inside the organization. You have to recruit potential teammates and sponsors, and there are opinion makers whose good regard you want. So how do you go about selling? Here are a few hints. 1. Ask for advice before asking for resources. If I go to you and I say, I've got this great idea, and I know you're going to want to support it, and if you could just give me a head count of 3 and some dollars, everything will be fine. It's going to change everything. What kind of a response am I likely to get? You don't really know if my idea is a good idea or not. It's all happening too fast. So the best thing to do is to delay or say no. So as I leave, and you have said no to me, what goes on in your mind? Well, there's really 2 possibilities. 1, my idea could be a great idea, you just said no to it, so you're a bad manager. Or, my idea is not a good idea, and you just said no to it, so you just saved the company some money, and you're a good manager. Now, you don't really know if my idea is good or bad, but you do know whether you want to be a good manager or a bad manager, so you choose good manager, and therefore my idea is bad. My idea is bad because that's the only way you can be a good manager after that transaction. Now let's try this again. Hi, I'm working on a new idea, and I need your advice. I wonder if you could give me the name of somebody over in marketing who I could talk to, because I'm really having trouble figuring out this aspect of the idea. Now the chances are that what you would say to me at that point is, well, why don't you go talk to Phyllis and give me a name and so forth. And as I walk away, well, you've spent a little bit of the company's resources on my idea, and there are 2 possibilities here. 1, my idea is a good idea, in which case you did a good thing, and you are a good manager because you took somebody who has an idea and you referred them to the right people to move that idea forward or change it or maybe even kill it if it turns out not to be a good idea. But you did a good thing. On the other hand, if my idea is a bad idea, you just wasted a little bit of Phyllis's time. So that makes you a not so good manager. Now, let's see, which do you prefer to be, a good manager or a bad manager? You prefer to be a good manager, and therefore my idea is good. The trick here is when you ask people for things and you want them to be on your side, always ask them for things to which the answer is yes, I will give it to you. Never ask for things to which the answer is no, I will not give that to you. So what is the one thing that almost everybody is always willing to give you? Advice. Of course, I'd be happy to give you advice. It makes me feel good. The first thing to do is ask people for advice on how to move the idea forward to the next step, rather than asking if it's a good idea or a bad idea, rather than asking them if you can have resources. All that comes later. When you come back to them next time, the thing to do is express gratitude. So you say, I went and I talked to Phyllis, and you can't believe she straightened me out on this and that. It was a very helpful conversation, and you've really helped my idea move forward. Well, now, you didn't give me just a little bit of help. It turns out you gave me a lot of help. And therefore, my idea is even better. And so the more you can ask for little things like advice or maybe just a tiny little favor, and then come back and express gratitude, the better your idea becomes in the minds of others. You can use this in all sorts of different ways. You can use it to recruit a sponsor. You can use it to recruit teammates by asking them for a little help. Gratitude actually is so powerful that you can even use it when someone opposes your idea. So, say you have a weekly meeting and there's someone who every time your idea comes up, they have critical things to say about it. And you think that this is ultimately going to get in your way. What happens if you really listen to them and you really hear what they're saying as an effort to help you? Maybe there's actually something in what they're saying and you figure out what it is that maybe you ought to go check out and think about a little more. And you go and you check it out, and it turns out that some of the things they said were actually useful. And you come back to them, and the next meeting you say, you know, I wasn't very happy with what you said to me last week, but actually I went out and checked it out. You were right. You've kept me from getting into trouble, and I really appreciate it. You've been very helpful. Thank you so much. Now, they just, whether they liked it or not, contributed to your idea. If they contributed to your idea, it probably means that there's something good about your idea, or they wouldn't have contributed to it. And so gratitude itself is another way of removing obstacles and moving forward. The only problem with this is that you cannot do this falsely and have it work. You have to actually feel the gratitude in your heart. People have a remarkable ability to tell when people are putting them on. And they may not know this consciously, but subconsciously they do know. And this will harden their heart against you rather than help you out. So use the gratitude card, but only use it when you are totally sincere. Another important thing that you can use to sell your idea is having not just one, but a coalition of sponsors. And we've talked about this before, but part of this has to do with acquiring sponsors, and part of it has to do with treating them well so you keep them on board and keep them enthusiastic about what you're doing. Every corporation has an immune system, and the purpose of the immune system is to protect the organism from dangerous ideas in the same sense that the human immune system protects us against dangerous organisms. One should not feel that the immune system is something wrong. Instead, it's just something which you have to manage as an entrepreneur. Now, there are several principles I can offer to help you with this. The first is stay underground for a while. Publicity triggers the immune system. Don't run your idea up the system and see up the flagpole and see who salutes. Let your friends help you rub the rough edges off it. Let it work for a while. Get rid of the obvious things that people would attack it on. Machiavelli, the Italian Renaissance politician and philosopher, said, "The prince who is the champion of a new social order has the most difficult challenge of all. For those whose privileged positions will be eliminated in the new order recognize this at once and come at you with their spears sharpened, whereas those who will benefit from it stand on the sidelines and wait to see what happens next." When you throw your idea out there for everybody to see in the very early stages, this is what can happen. The second thing I've already mentioned, which is hear concerns and objections, is an effort to help you avoid trouble. And when you hear those objections, listen carefully and find things that need to be changed. Morph your idea a little bit, not because you think you should do it for them, but because you actually believe that you've learned something new. And as I mentioned before, express gratitude. But that opening your heart to actually hear objections and not get defensive at once is a very important part of avoiding the immune response and moving your idea forward. And of course, having good sponsors helps too. Now, one of the tools that I've seen when things are really in trouble is something which we call rename and press on. Watanabe-san was the father of the NEC personal computer. And when the story begins, his job was selling chips. And he was having great difficulty. Nobody could figure out what these were for. This was a couple of years before the IBM PC. He wanted a way to show its usefulness, and so he built a basic little PC at home. And he said, why don't we sell these basic little PCs, and then people will play with them, and they'll get the idea. Engineers will learn what these microprocessors are for. Unfortunately, no one inside the company wanted to do so. The computer division was used to selling computers which filled a whole room, and they thought of it as a toy and rejected it. The household goods division said, no, we don't want to do this. And his boss finally got mad at him because he was working on this and getting nowhere. And he said, you engineers are all the same. I mean, you have a job selling, but you try to turn it into a design job. This is not a design job. Now go out there and sell microprocessors. At this point, Watanabe-san, instead of accepting failure, took the PC apart, put the parts in a bag along with instructions for reassembling it, took out a magic marker and labeled the outside of the bag sales tool. And he showed it to his boss. And he said, boss, I've got this great new sales tool. A couple of things were surprising about this. One, his boss said, okay, go ahead. And this shows that the immune system of the corporation is a lot like the immune system of a human being. What it does is it looks at the outside rather than looking at the inside. Just as your immune system recognizes cell surface antigens rather than looking at the DNA inside the cell, so it is with ideas inside the large organization. And by changing the name, you can actually change the way the immune system responds to it. The second thing was the surprising success of the NEC personal computer. Not just engineers bought it, but flight attendants, teachers, all sorts of ordinary people, and it became quite a craze. And of course, Watanabe-san ended up as the head of a large PC business inside NEC. Another trick that I think has worked for many people, you think that when you want to sell your idea to somebody, you want to tell them how great it's going to be and how it's going to change everything, and that only scares them. What you want to tell them is surprisingly the opposite of that. Here's what I want to do next, and this doesn't matter. It's only a test. You don't actually say this part of it. You would probably want me to run a test on this idea rather than actually go out and do it so that we can find out whether it's a good idea. Well, this is the test you were about to propose. I'm proposing a test, and therefore it's safe because the real decision comes later. And you can move your idea along quite a ways as a series of tests. I've seen this work over and over again. Finally, the strange thing about human nature is that people are much more convinced when we're talking about entrepreneurial projects by the potential loss of not doing it than the gain of doing it. So often when you look at your idea, you can say, well, what happens if we don't do this? What happens if our competition does this first? What happens to our customers if they don't receive this form of satisfaction, and so forth? And if you can talk about the losses, it turns out that what you're doing is calming down. You say, well, if you're afraid, which people are always a little bit afraid of new things, then the thing to be afraid of is not doing this rather than to be afraid of doing it. A lot of research has been done on this, and this is a solid point which won't go away. Robert Cialdini, kind of the guru of influence in corporate life, gives us a couple of points on selling things that I think are interesting. The first he calls public declaration. If you can get people to say something in public, they will continue to act in consonance with that. One of the tricks that I've used in my life is to talk to speechwriters of important people. I once got Al Gore to say in a speech that the project that we were working on was an example of the sort of thing that he was hoping would happen in government. After that, not only does he act more in alignment with that thing, but so do other people. Another key that Cialdini talks about is social proof. If you can show that others are doing it, it's much safer to go and do it. So as a creative person, you want to say, this is the first time anything like this has ever happened, and isn't it cool and wonderful? But what Cialdini is saying is, no, you just say this is like all these other things. I can remember when I first started trying to tell people about entrepreneuring, I was thinking, aren't I cool? I'm an author, I've written about this thing, and that makes me special. But what I found is that to sell it, what I had to do was go out there in the world and find that entrepreneuring had been going on all along, and I was just discovering it and writing about it. I wasn't inventing it. It was something that had always been. Finally, Cialdini says, scarcity is what makes things valuable. How can you show that there aren't a lot of these things available and you have the opportunity to be in this? You all are familiar with this in the kind of buy now that cheap salespeople use, and they say there's only 3 left, and if you don't buy it right away, well, it's not going to be available. And that scarcity it's human nature. As soon as human nature sees something is scarce, they want it. Let's talk about the exercises for Module 5, because they're quite different from any of the earlier modules. What you're going to do is practice selling in groups of 3. You'll be given an idea to sell, along with the roles of the seller and the role of the potential buyer, what the seller wants from that buyer, what's good about the idea, and also possible objections to the idea from the company's perspective, and then also emotional and selfish concerns that the buyer might have. And using those things, you're going to act out a sales call in which you use all the tools at your disposal, such as the ones we've given you and others, to move your idea forward. So each of you gets to play all 3 roles. One person sells, one person is a somewhat but not totally resistant buyer, one person watches and takes notes on selling methods used and others that might have been used. You get feedback, you try it again. This exercise will be done synchronously on Link. So you go to the Module 5 Yammer page and it will show you how to sign on to Link and give you the profiles and so forth. And you get to practice selling. And then you reflect on what you've learned as a seller, a buyer, an observer. And when you've done all that, you're done with Module 5. This leaves you with the opportunity to go into the Idea Expo.